Oh, there she goes. Oh, Randy Crawford and the Crusaders there, and Street Life on DCFM 88.9. Well, it's that time of the week when we say g'day to the bloke that's sitting on my right, and here we go.
It's time now for the latest news on what's hot and what's not in the world of technology with Mathew Dickerson on Tech Talk. Here on DCFM 88.9.
Morning, Matt.
Morning. It's good to be able to sit in the studio and see you. It's
Yes.
for a little while there we couldn't do this, but it's actually nice to be back in here. 1.5 metres apart, of course.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, easily
At
one and a
least
half.
1.5 metres
Yes,
apart, yes.
yeah. And we've got the stuff here. If you're diseased, we'll...
Thanks. Just give me a spray of that.
I'll
before I
give you,
come in.
give you a spray of that. Look, we've got a whole heap of good stories today. Obviously, the first one I'm going to ask you, and it goes without any question at all, Google. And what they put on their Facebook page yesterday, what they put out on everything yesterday regarding the news in Australia.
Yeah, well, and we've talked a little bit about this before, where the ACCC and the federal government have been talking about the fact that social media providers, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, can have all this wonderful news content and they're paying absolutely nothing for it. You've got news outlets who are paying journalists, are doing research, making sure information's correct, and they're producing the information, but they're not getting any benefits from it from these other organisations. So the government, in conjunction with the ACCC, have basically come out and they've said, we want you, Google and Facebook and other providers, to start paying those news outlets for it. Not paying the government, paying those news outlets for it. And you can imagine that's never going to go down well. You say to a business, you get it for free now, you're going to have to start paying for it. Didn't go down well. And I noticed a couple of days ago, you went to the Google homepage and sure enough, here's a little message for Australians out there. And it starts putting a lot of misinformation out there. In fact, Rod Sims from the ACCC has come out and called it Google misinformation, saying that the decisions by this government are going to make Google have to charge you for YouTube, charge you for searches, charge you for a whole range of services that are free now. Now, obviously, that's not correct. They can charge for them if they want. There's no requirement from the government legislation that's proposed to make them pay, charge users. It's just asking them to pay news providers, which I think seems fair and reasonable.
And of course, Google, have a wonderful working relationship with the News Corporation, I don't think. And it's Rupert Murdoch. But
That's right.
It's Rupert Murdoch doing this, and I suppose other news outlets, but certainly it's Murdoch in America doing it all, and Google and jumping up. But they've been fighting for years anyway.
They have, and I think in the whole scheme of things, you think this mightn't be much. How much would they have to pay Australian news providers compared to the overall valuation of a Google or a Facebook? And it is a drop in the ocean, but we actually are leading the charge across the world in this. So I think that the Google and the Facebook attack maybe on this decision will probably more be about what will happen if they start having to do this across the world. Then it starts to add up to a few more dollars.
I agree. And of course, as soon as that happens, I think there'll be a president by the name of Donald Trump that'll be next cab off the rank, followed very closely by Boris Johnson.
Yeah, exactly.
And
right.
Macron will do the same thing because he's already mentioned it.
Well, yeah, and in Europe there's a couple of governments that have started to talk about this, but no one's actually gone as far as we have so far. So there'll be a bit of a battle here in Australia, I think anyway, and a lot of that will be a battle around, not legal battles, but a battle around the minds of the public and exactly what Google started now with this misinformation campaign.
Indeed. Now, I have an Oral-B electric toothbrush at home. What is happening with 6 years research into a new toothbrush? This is unbelievable. How can you research for 6 years into a toothbrush? Come on.
Well, there's a famous line. One of my favourite TV shows is The Big Bang Theory.
Oh, yes.
And there's a famous line on that where they're sitting around and Penny's making some hair berets and they're saying we should put Bluetooth on it. And Penny asks why. And they said, well, everything's better with Bluetooth. And that's the case with this toothbrush. It's got Bluetooth because everything's better with Bluetooth. It actually has an app that comes with it. Now, I know this starts to sound crazy. You've got an app associated with your Bluetooth-enabled toothbrush, but what it actually does is you sit the app on the bench, make sure you've got a waterproof phone, obviously. You sit the app on the bench when you're cleaning your teeth, and while you clean your teeth, it's tracking where your toothbrush is going, and you actually see a picture of some, not your teeth, but some mimic teeth on the screen of your phone, and it shows that you've done each part of your mouth, all the teeth in your mouth, done properly, and when it does that, they actually light up and they're nice and glistening on the screen, so you know you've done that part and move on to other parts. I think the bottom line here is most people probably don't brush their teeth for long enough, and this is really a way of training people to brush their teeth better using Bluetooth and using an app. So a lot of research has gone into it, and that's what we've come up with.
Yeah, you want to know something? I think I'll just go back to the old one. It's unbelievable. You know, I can see some advantages, I suppose, but gee, you've got to have waterproof phone and fiddle around and start all that in the morning. Who's got time?
Who's got their eyes open enough to do all that?
I was going to say, exactly. Now, China. Now, you and I have been to China a few times, and I have been to electronics factories in China where I've seen them building screens, such as the one I've got in front of me here, and they just go down the line, and when they get to a certain point, they whiz off, and they suddenly get the Sony brand on them or the Lenovo brand on them. It's all the same screen. But that's in electronics, and it's cheap, and every minute, 20 minutes, they ring a bell and the person moves on to the next thing so they don't get bored with building these boards for TV screens. What's happening?
Well, Foxconn is the company that makes most of the electronics around the world. Most people haven't heard of Foxconn, and it's not a player as such in the market because their job is to manufacture for the Sony, the Dell, the Apple, the various companies around the world that produce the electronics. But the chairman of Foxconn has just come out and he said, which is a big statement from him, that he believes that China, being the factory of the world, the days of that are numbered. And there's a few reasons for that. There's tariffs around the world that are starting to bite, so that when people are having things manufactured in China, comes out with made in China, some companies are imposing tariffs. The other part is that there's a bit of anti-China sentiment around the world now. Some part of it's to do with COVID-19, some parts to do with some other processes that are occurring across the world. So he believes there are other countries now that will start to have manufacturing processes in them, similar to China, where you've got a large amount of people, large available workforces, cheap labour costs, and so he named places like India, Malaysia, Taiwan, for example, which is where Foxconn, where the actual company is started, or where it started from, and even Vietnam. So the latest LG mobile phone called the Velvet, it was manufactured in Vietnam. So there's other countries now, and the interesting part about this, you mentioned Trump earlier. Trump's obviously trying to make America great again. One of the ways he's decided on a whim to do that is to impose tariffs on China, thinking that that will bring manufacturing back to America. It won't, because labour forces are still too dear in America, as they are in Australia. All it's doing is possibly moving it from China to places like India, Vietnam, etc. One of the interesting things here is that, say India, for example, they actually have tariffs imposed on Chinese-produced goods. So, for example, an iPhone is 20% dearer in India than elsewhere because of the 20% tariff. If they move the manufacturing of the iPhone to India, that will cut 20% off the price immediately, which obviously will be a huge sales increase for the iPhone in India. So interesting, but I think we'll start to see less and less of the made in China sticker.
Yeah, I think so too. And unfortunately, our wine's going to copy a bit of a pasting on that one, but I'll talk about that later. Now, supersonic jets, can they be carbon neutral? This is good stuff. It'll revolutionise the air industry if we ever get one back again.
When we finally get one back, and it is an interesting time to talk about new planes. And we talked recently about Virgin Galactic, who want to have a Mach 3 plane. We haven't seen a passenger plane since the Concorde. It was retired probably a decade or two ago now. We haven't seen a passenger plane that's supersonic since then. But interestingly now, there are two companies talking about producing a supersonic plane. The latest one is called, appropriately, Boom.
Yes, Boom. I love that.
So, and they're talking about not only producing this jet, and they produced a 1/3 scale model that's actually got a pilot but no passengers flying in it at the moment, but they're saying they want to produce this carbon neutral. Now, the manufacturing process, carbon neutral, they can buy all their electricity, they can buy their manufacturing processes to be carbon neutral, but the fuel itself is produced by a company called Prometheus, and they actually produce carbon neutral jet fuel, which sounds incredible, but again, the processes they have in place, the renewable energy they have in place, and the carbon offsets, and there's a bit of controversy around carbon offsets, but I won't go down that path, but carbon offsets, by purchasing all of those, they're able to actually produce jet fuel and produce the plane completely carbon neutral, which sounds unbelievable for a normal plane, but for a supersonic plane, even better.
Oh yeah, and let's get supersonic back in the air. Having experienced it once in my life was tremendous. It's one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life, actually.
Yeah, right.
But, again, a Concorde. Very expensive, but I did it.
Yeah.
I did it. I came back normally the other way. I couldn't afford the return flight. Very quickly, a 3D house, and we're going to look at phones that alert you for earthquakes. Just see the 3D house, first of all, which is called Camp, which I think is wonderful. We had Boom this morning, now Camp.
We've got the first ever 2-story 3D printed house. This happened in Europe.
Yep.
The 3D printing process took about 15 days, so not a lot of print time as such, and as the name suggests, just like a 3D printer that does layer on layer, it did layer on layer of concrete to build all the walls. Obviously the internal fittings were done in a traditional way, but all the internal walls were done, internal and external walls were done with a 3D printer that just laid layer upon layer. Now we're on radio, so you can't see it, but I've watched the video. It sounds incredible, and it was to watch it. So 15 days of print time, bang, there's your house. So for sustainable processors and for low socioeconomic areas. I think fantastic, very cheap, and not a lot of labour involved. One person monitoring the computer and someone to keep feeding concrete into it, and that was all it needed.
All it needed. Then you've got obviously labourers to put the thing up.
Yeah.
That's all right. And very quickly, phones to alert people of earthquakes. I mean, earthquakes are not big here, although we've had one in Orange recently, one in Bathurst recently, but they're only minor things. But
I think they were called earthquakes, were they? They were called a little minor tremor. They were so small.
Yeah. But in New Zealand, it'd be very handy.
Yeah, that's right. And this is mainly focused around California. There are lots of seismic sensors in the ground in California, very expensive. And then getting the information out to people to say that something's happening is a complicated process. A few seconds can make a difference. If you can pull over the side of a road, get off that bridge, get away from a building that might collapse, those things can make a difference to people's lives. What they're doing now, this is Google working on this, what they're doing is they've actually got accelerometers in phones, and they've got lots of phones they've got access to the information from. So they're saying that by using this technology, phones sitting around on desks, sitting around, they can start to detect exactly right, a minor tremor. Once they start to detect that minor tremor, the information gathered by Google can be put together to say enough phones are experiencing this, we know something's happening, and then more importantly alert everyone in that area, because I've also got access to all those phones, to say there's an earthquake coming. Now it might only be 10 seconds away because those first tremors might start before the main earthquake actually hits, but that can be enough to save lives rather than some government seismic sensor, which is certainly more sensitive to all of that, but then how do you get that information out to people in a timely fashion?
I think it's great.
Yeah.
Matt, always good talking with you, mate. We better let you go, and thanks for Tech Talk. We'll see you next Wednesday morning.
Sounds great.
Mathew Dickerson on DCFM 88.9.